I was nobody at Vantage and Brell. I knew it, my supervisor knew it, and if the universe had an HR department, it would have filed a memo confirming it. I was 23 years old, a junior account coordinator on a 3-month contract, the kind of employee who gets a badge that says temp in block letters, which feels less like identification and more like a verdict. My desk was wedged beside the server room, where the hum of cooling fans was so constant that I'd stopped hearing it, the way you stop hearing traffic when you've lived near a highway long enough. This was Dallas. This was February. And this was, without question, the least impressive chapter of my life. My name is Priya, and the story I'm about to tell you started not with a grand decision, but with a broken elevator. Before I get into the details, I want to ask you something. Have you ever spent years developing a skill, something you taught yourself out of love, not ambition, and felt like that skill belonged to a completely different version of your life? Like it existed in one world, and your career existed in another, and never once would the two worlds touch? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to a Tuesday in February that I will never, ever forget. Vantage and Brell Consulting occupied the top 6 floors of a mirrored glass tower in downtown Dallas. The kind of building that looks important from the freeway, that catches the sunset in a way that makes people in traffic think something significant must happen in there. And maybe it did for the people on the top floors. For me, on floor 19 of 24, significance was not exactly an abundant supply. I had come to Vantage and Brell through a temp agency after a year that I can only describe as a sustained exercise in humility. I had graduated with a degree in business communications, moved back in with my parents for 8 months, applied to 61 jobs, received 11 interviews, 0 offers, and eventually signed with a staffing agency that placed me at Vantage and Brell to fill in for someone on maternity leave. The position was supposed to last 8 weeks. I was now in month 3. No one had explained why. I told myself it was because I was good at the work. My supervisor, a meticulous man named Derek who communicated primarily through emails even when he was standing 6 feet away, had never actually told me I was doing well. But he hadn't let me go either, and in the vacuum of that ambiguity, I had decided to interpret silence as approval. The truth was that I was terrified every single day, terrified of making a mistake, of asking the wrong question, of being seen as the temp who didn't understand how things worked here. I kept my head down. I did exactly what I was asked and nothing more. I arrived early and stayed late, not out of ambition, but out of a desperate need to prove I deserved to be there at all. The only part of my life that felt genuinely, completely mine, was my relationship with my grandmother. Nanny, that's what we called her, had come to live with us when I was 12, after my grandfather passed. She was 71 years old, small and sharp-eyed, with silver hair she wore in a long braid down her back. She had grown up in a village in Gujarat, India, had come to America in her 40s, and had never fully mastered spoken English. She communicated beautifully in Gujarati, adequately in Hindi, and not at all in the language of a world that expected everyone to speak in one way or be considered slow. When she moved in, my parents, who were busy, loving, and perpetually overwhelmed, did their best. But Nanny spent a lot of time quiet, not sad exactly, just separate, like she was watching life happen through glass. I couldn't stand it. So I learned Gujarati. Not the vacation version, not the handful of phrases you pick up from grandparents at holidays. I mean, I genuinely, rigorously, obsessively learned it. I bought books. I watched films. I recruited Nanny herself as my teacher, and she bloomed in those lessons in a way I had never seen her bloom before. Within 2 years, we could have real conversations, long ones, about her childhood, her memories, her opinions, her fears, her jokes, and she had wonderful jokes. Dry and precise, and often devastating. By the time I was in college, Gujarati was the language of my deepest relationships. It was how I knew my grandmother. It was, in many ways, how I knew myself. But in the professional world, it was invisible. A beautiful, private thing that lived at home, at the dinner table, in Sunday phone calls. It had nothing to do with consulting strategy, with client deliverables, with the language of Vantage and Brell. Or so I thought. The broken elevator, happened on a Tuesday. I was heading down to the lobby to retrieve a package for Derek, a box of branded merchandise for a client presentation happening the next morning. The main elevator bank was under maintenance, something to do with a sensor on the cable mechanism, and so all traffic had been rerouted to the 2 service elevators at the back of the building. The lobby was backed up, chaotic in the particular way that corporate lobbies get chaotic when something minor inconveniences a large number of self-important people simultaneously. I arrived in the lobby and retrieved the box from the front desk, and that was when I saw her. She was sitting in the cluster of chairs near the revolving door, the seating area technically designated for guests waiting to be received, though most people barely acknowledged it existed. She was older, perhaps in her mid-70s, wearing a salwar kameez in deep teal, her white hair pulled back neatly. She had a small leather purse on her lap and was holding it with both hands in the way that people hold things when they're not sure what else to do with themselves. She was watching the lobby with careful, attentive eyes, and she looked completely, utterly lost. Not confused, exactly. More like she had been sitting there a while and had concluded that no help was coming and was deciding what to do next. I noticed because I notice things like this. When you've spent years watching your grandmother sit quietly on the edges of rooms, you develop a certain sensitivity to that particular kind of solitude. I almost kept walking. I want to be honest about that. I was holding a box that Derek needed. There was a backup at the service elevator, and inserting myself into a stranger's situation in my workplace lobby was the kind of initiative that, for someone in my position, could go wrong in a dozen different ways. What if she wasn't lost? What if she didn't want to be approached? What if I said something wrong, and it reflected badly on the company, and somehow, improbably, traced back to my desk by the server room? But I looked at her again, the way she was holding that purse. I put the box down on a nearby table, walked over, and said in English first, "Hi, are you waiting for someone? Can I help you?" She looked up at me, and I saw immediate relief in her face, followed immediately by a kind of apologetic regret. She said something in response, clearly a full sentence, clearly an answer, and it took me exactly 1 second to realize I was not understanding her. Not because I wasn't listening, because she wasn't speaking English. She was speaking Gujarati. The sentence she'd said resolved itself in my mind with a slight delay, the way a radio signal comes in through static. "I am trying to find my son, but the girl at the desk did not understand me, and I did not want to bother anyone." I stared at her for a moment. Then I responded in Gujarati, "I understand you. Tell me what you need." The transformation in her face was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She didn't just look relieved. She looked seen, like a light had been switched on behind her eyes. She reached out and touched my hand, and her grip was surprisingly firm. "You speak Gujarati," she said. "Real Gujarati, not just 2 words." "Real Gujarati," I confirmed, smiling. "My grandmother taught me. Now tell me about your son." Her name, she told me, was Hemlata. She had come from her home in Plano, a 40-minute drive, because she had not been able to reach her son by phone and she wanted to see him in person. She didn't have an appointment. She didn't have a company directory or an employee extension or a last name badge to show. She just had a mother's certainty that if she came to where he worked, she would find him. Her son's name was Arjun Brell. I kept my expression very neutral. Arjun Brell, as in the Brell of Vantage and Brell, as in the co-founder and managing director of the company whose building I was standing in. The man whose framed philosophy of leadership hung on the wall of the reception area in a sans serif font that cost more per letter than my hourly rate. "Arjun Brell is your son," I said. "Yes," she said, with the mild exasperation of someone who has been confirming an obvious fact for a long time. "Do you know him?" "I know of him," I said carefully. He's a very important person here." "He is my son," she said simply, as if those 2 categories of importance were in no particular conflict with each other. "Can you help me find him?" I thought about Derek, about the box on the table, about my badge that said temp. "Yes," I said. "Let me see what I can do. Would you like to sit somewhere more comfortable while I make some calls? Getting to Arjun Brell's office was not a simple matter. I started with the general reception desk, where a woman named Cora, professional, efficient, and visibly overwhelmed by the elevator backup, looked at me with the particular expression of someone who is deciding how much of their attention this situation merits. She says she's here to see Arjun Brell, I said. She's his mother. Cora blinked. His mother? Yes. Does she have an appointment? No. Cora's expression shifted into something that was not quite skepticism and not quite sympathy, but existed in the uncomfortable space between them. I'll need to contact his assistant. Can she wait? She's been waiting for 20 minutes already, I said. The firmness in my own voice surprised me a little. She came from Plano. She's 75 years old and she's been sitting over there by the door alone this whole time. Cora looked past me toward Hemlata, who was sitting with her purse and her quiet dignity, watching us with careful eyes. Something shifted in Cora's face. I'll call up now, she said. Right now, what's your name? Priya. I'm in account coordination on 19. She was already dialing. I went back to Hemlata and told her in Gujarati that someone was making calls to reach her son. She nodded, unsurprised. She had the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating worlds that were not built for her. While we waited, she talked, and I listened. She told me about Arjun as a child, stubborn and brilliant, she said, always the child who needed to know why, who could not accept, because I said so as an answer to anything. She told me about the early years of the company, when Arjun and his business partner had been working out of a rented office space with second-hand furniture and no clients, and she had prayed so hard for them that she had worn a groove into her prayer beads. She told me about Arjun's divorce 4 years ago, which she mentioned briefly and with great care, like pressing a finger against a bruise to test whether it still hurt. He doesn't call as much now, she said. I know he is busy. I know this company is his whole life, but sometimes I think he has forgotten that he has a mother who is also his whole life. She said it without bitterness, just fact, the kind of fact that is harder to hear precisely because it carries no complaint. I told her about my nanny, about the lessons, about the jokes, about how learning her language had been the most important thing I had ever done. Hemlata listened with absolute attention, the way older people sometimes listen when they have been given the gift of being spoken to directly. Your grandmother is lucky, she said finally. I'm the lucky one, I said. I almost didn't bother to learn. I almost thought it wasn't worth the time. She looked at me with those sharp, warm eyes. But you did. But I did. She nodded slowly. The things worth doing never announce themselves as worth doing. You have to decide that yourself. Arjun Brell's executive assistant, a man named Timothy, called back to say that Mr. Brell was in an important strategy meeting that was expected to conclude around 4 o'clock. It was currently 2:15. He asked if the visitor could return tomorrow or schedule a formal appointment. I relayed this to Hemlata. She received it the way she seemed to receive most information, without drama, processing it quietly, adjusting. I will wait, she said. That's almost 2 hours, I said. I know how long 2 hours is, she said, with a gentle precision that made me smile. I have been waiting for my son to slow down for 4 years. 2 hours is nothing. I looked at the box on the table. I thought about Derek's emails. I thought about the presentation materials, the morning deadline, the things that had seemed urgent 7 minutes ago. Then I thought, she has been waiting for 4 years. Would you like to see the building? I asked. I can show you around, tell you about what they do here, what Arjun has built. She looked at me for a moment. Then, you will not get in trouble. Probably, I admitted. She considered this. Then she stood, smoothed her camis, adjusted her purse strap, and said, in perfect, prim Gujarati, Then let us be quick. We were not quick. We spent the next hour and 45 minutes moving through Vantage and Brell, with the deliberate, unhurried pace of people who have decided that this moment matters more than the next scheduled one. I showed Hemlata the strategy floor, explaining in Gujarati what the different teams worked on, what consulting actually meant, how companies brought their problems here and left, ideally, with solutions. She asked sharp questions. What kind of problems? What if the solution was wrong? Who decided? She had clearly raised a son in the habit of asking why, because she had the same instinct herself. I introduced her to people along the way. Some were polite but distracted. A few were genuinely curious, asking me to translate their greetings, delighted when Hemlata responded with warmth and humor. In the research library, she spent 10 minutes looking at framed print campaign materials on the wall, recognizing her son's company logo on several of them, tracing the letters with her finger. He worked so hard, she said softly. Even when he was small, he always wanted to show me something he had made. She said it past tense, almost without meaning to. In the innovation lab on 21, where junior teams were building client prototype strategies, I translated a conversation between Hemlata and a 26-year-old analyst named Grace, who wanted to know how Hemlata had come to America. Hemlata told her in 3 sentences what must have been a story that contained multitudes. She was like that. I was learning, surgical with words, precise in the way that people become when they have had to be their own translators for decades. Grace said with total sincerity, "That's incredible," and Hemlata said, through me, "It was just life. Life is just incredible if you let yourself see it." Grace wrote it down in her notebook. I saw her do it. I was taking Hemlata back toward the lobby when I turned to check on her and noticed, through the glass-walled conference room we were passing, a man standing very still inside. He was tall, probably early 50s, with close-cropped dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples. He was not sitting at the conference table. He was standing near the window, turned not toward the city view but toward the hallway, toward us. He was watching his mother look at the framed employee photos on the wall outside the conference room, looking for his face, I realized. She was looking for her son's face in the photos. The man inside the glass room was Arjun Brell. And his expression, I caught it for only a second before he noticed me noticing him, was something I don't have a clean word for. It was the face of a person seeing something they had not let themselves miss, because missing it would have required admitting they had lost it. He looked away. I kept walking. We returned to the lobby at 4:05. Hemlata had grown quieter in the last 20 minutes, the energy of the visit settling into something more contemplative. I found her a better seat, one farther from the revolving door where it was warmer, and told her I would check with Timothy again about the meeting. I had just reached the reception desk when I heard my name. Priya. I turned. Arjun Brell was crossing the lobby. He was not what I had expected from the framed philosophy and the sans serif font. In person, he was less polished somehow, or perhaps the polish was there, but underneath it was something more complicated. He walked with the confidence of someone who had made 1,000 decisions, but right now his attention was not on anything in the lobby except the small woman in the teal camis who had just looked up from her seat and gone very, very still. He reached her before I could say anything. He crouched down in front of her chair. This man whose company had 47 floors of real estate in downtown Dallas, whose meetings ran the afternoon, who was probably worth more money than I would see in 3 lifetimes. He crouched down and said something to his mother in Gujarati. His voice was low. I was not close enough to hear it clearly. Hemlata looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and put both of her hands on either side of his face, the way you hold something you are afraid of losing or have already half lost, and said something back to him. I turned away because some moments are not meant to be witnessed fully. I looked at the revolving door, at the people coming in and out, at the gray-blue February sky through the glass. When I turned back, Arjun was standing. His eyes were red at the edges. He looked at me. "You're Priya," he said, "from the account coordination team." "Yes, sir." "You speak Gujarati." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment. "How?" "My grandmother," I said. "She came from Gujarat. I learned it for her." He looked at his mother, then back at me. "I've been in that conference room for the past hour and a half," he said. "My 4 o'clock ran over, but I got out early." He paused. Timothy told me my mother was here. I was going to send him down to bring her up. Another pause. But then I looked through the glass and I saw the two of you talking, and I stayed there. For how long? I asked. Too long, he said, and the way he said it made clear he wasn't talking about the afternoon. He looked at me with the direct, evaluating attention of someone who has made a career of quickly reading situations. You were supposed to be at your desk today. I was, I agreed. What were you supposed to be doing? Preparing materials for the Kellerman presentation. Are they done? No. He nodded slowly. Then you put yourself at professional risk to spend your afternoon translating for a woman you'd never met. I didn't have a clean answer to that. She reminded me of my grandmother, I said finally. I couldn't just walk past her. Hemlata had been watching this exchange with the alert, patient attention of someone who has navigated languages her whole life and learned to read meaning without words. She asked me in Gujarati what he was saying. I told her, "He is asking why I helped you." She looked at her son and said, in Gujarati, something that I translated for him directly. She helped me because she was raised right. You could learn something. Arjun Brell looked at his mother. He blinked once. And then, to my complete astonishment, he laughed. A real one. The kind that arrives unexpectedly and doesn't apologize for itself. Yeah, he said in English. Yeah, I could. He asked to speak with me after he'd seen his mother to a car. I spent the intervening 20 minutes in a state of suspended dread, composing a mental defense of my actions that I cycled through approximately 9 times. His office was on the top floor. I had never been above 22. The elevator opened onto a reception area with a wall of windows that made the whole city look like a model someone had built and left on a table. His actual office was behind a door of pale wood, large and spare, and oddly quiet for a room with that much power attached to it. There was a photo on the bookshelf. A woman in a teal sari, younger, holding a baby. I recognized the sari color before I recognized anything else. He gestured to a chair. I sat. He sat across from me, not behind his desk, and for a moment said nothing. He had the quality, I realized, of someone who was genuinely comfortable with silence, not using it to intimidate, but because he was still thinking, and he saw no reason to fill the air until he had finished. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said. I had not been expecting that. "Sir, you said you learned Gujarati for her. Tell me about her." So I did. I told him about Nanny, about the lessons, about the jokes, about the way she had sat quietly on the edges of rooms before I learned to reach her in her own language, about how learning to speak to her had taught me something I couldn't fully articulate, something about what it cost a person to live in a world that didn't make room for them, and what it meant to be the one who made the room. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet again. "My mother has been living in Plano for 11 years, he said finally. "I see her on her birthday, on Diwali, and when there's a family function I can't reasonably avoid. I call her every Sunday for 12 minutes. I know it's 12 minutes because I checked my phone records once." He said it with the precision of a man who is done protecting himself from a fact. I tell myself I'm busy. I tell myself she has my aunt nearby, she has friends at the temple, she has a full life. And she does. He paused. But I know that when she walks into this building, which is the building where her son has spent the last 11 years building something, no one knows how to speak to her. No one has ever tried. He leaned forward slightly. How many employees do you think we have in this company who have parents, or grandparents, or family members who don't primarily speak English? I hadn't thought about it from that angle. I don't know, quite a few, I'd think. More than quite a few, he said. We're in Dallas. Our workforce is 38% first and second generation immigrant. And when I look at how we handle clients, how we handle community engagement, how we handle internal culture, we operate as if English is the only language that signifies intelligence, the only language worth accommodating. He paused. I've built a company that would have made my own mother feel invisible in the lobby, without thinking twice about it. He said it not with anger, but with the focused clarity of someone making an accounting. I want to change that, he said, And watching you this afternoon, how you moved through this building with her, how you translated conversations and made introductions and just, he searched for the word, made her feel like she belonged in this space. That is a skill, Priya, a rare one, and I have been underutilizing it spectacularly by putting you next to the server room. I stared at him. I am next to the server room, literally. I know where your desk is, he said, and there was a wryness in it that reminded me, distinctly, of Hemlata. He sat back. I want to offer you a full-time position, not a contract extension, a permanent role. The focus would be on cultural accessibility inside the company and in how we serve clients, building language equity into how we operate, developing programs to ensure that people across our staff can bring their whole cultural identities to work instead of leaving half of themselves in the parking garage every morning. I was struggling to process this at the right speed. Mr. Brell, I'm still technically a temp. I don't have a graduate degree. I don't have experience in organizational development or... You have fluent Gujarati, he said. Do you know how many people in this building can say that? Well, one other person, but she went home an hour ago. One, he said. You, and you used it today, not because anyone asked you to, not because there was a protocol in place, but because you saw someone who needed it and you refused to walk past her. He looked at me steadily. That is not a credential you can get in a classroom. I thought about the box by the reception desk, about Derek's emails that I hadn't answered, about the Kellerman presentation materials that were definitely not ready. What about Derek? I said. My supervisor, the presentation materials, I genuinely did not finish. The Kellerman materials were completed by the rest of the team 2 hours ago, he said. I checked. A pause. Derek is going to be fine. You are going to be reassigned. There was a long quiet in which I became aware of the city below the windows, steady and indifferent and enormous. Take the weekend, he said. Think about it. But I want you to know what you did today for my mother is not a small thing. You gave her an afternoon where she mattered, where this world that has taken her son made a little room for her. He stopped. You gave me something too. I spent an hour watching through that glass and remembering things I had decided were too complicated to go back to. Another pause. She's staying for dinner tonight. I called her in the car. We're going to cook. She's going to correct everything I do. I am genuinely looking forward to it. I felt something rise in my chest that I had not felt in a long time in that building. Something that felt like, of all things, hope. I don't need the weekend, I said. I'll take it. He raised an eyebrow slightly. The job, I said. I want it. He nodded once. Good. The next 8 months were the most demanding and the most meaningful of my professional life. I started by conducting what I called, to the initial skepticism and eventual enthusiasm of the leadership team, a language reality audit. We surveyed the entire company, confidentially, asking employees what languages they spoke at home, what languages their closest family members used primarily, and whether they had ever felt that their cultural background was an invisible weight they carried into the office each day. The results were, to put it plainly, stunning. 41% of our workforce spoke a language other than English as their primary home language. The most common were Spanish, Hindi, Vietnamese, Tagalog, and Gujarati. More than 60% of respondents said they had, at least once, felt they needed to minimize or conceal some aspect of their cultural identity in the workplace. 32% said they had had a family member visit the office and felt embarrassed by how that family member was received. That number, 32%, I kept on a sticky note on my monitor for the entire first year. We redesigned the lobby, not the physical structure, but the culture of it. We trained every person in a client-facing role in basic cultural hospitality, not just language phrases, though we provided those, but the philosophy underneath them. That a visitor who cannot speak your language is not a problem to be managed, but a person to be received with the same fullness you would extend to anyone else. We established a language resource network, a voluntary database of employees willing to be contacted when a situation arose requiring translation or cultural context. Within the first month, it had 112 names on it. People who had been carrying those skills quietly for years, skills they had never been asked to bring to work, skills they had learned for the same reason I had learned mine, out of love for someone. We launched a program called Bring Your Language to Work. Clunky name, I'll admit, but the idea was elegant. We created formal spaces for employees to teach phrases or cultural context from their home languages to colleagues. It started as a monthly lunch session. Within 6 months, it was happening in 3 departments on a weekly basis, entirely driven by employee demand. We didn't stop at language. We examined our client hospitality protocols, our hearing practices, our internal advancement patterns. We found, as I had suspected, that the parts of the company that had been invisible were not just employees. They were the invisible costs of a culture that had been asking people to leave their full selves at the door. Hemlata came to the office twice more in those 8 months. The second time, Cora at reception recognized her immediately, greeted her in 3 words of Gujarati she had learned from the language lunch series. Suchi, Auntie, and Hemlata looked at me afterward with an expression I can only describe as triumphant. The third time, Arjun was waiting in the lobby for her. He had cleared his afternoon. They sat in the corner seating area for an hour before they went to lunch, and I watched from across the lobby as he spoke to her haltingly, working at it, clearly still learning in Gujarati. He made mistakes. She corrected him. They argued gently about pronunciation. He threw up his hands once, and she patted his arm with the brisk affection of a woman who has been right about everything for 75 years. I went back to my desk and did actual work, the best kind of work. In October of that year, Vantage and Brell was recognized at a regional business conference for outstanding innovation in workplace cultural accessibility. Arjun asked me to attend. I assumed I would be sitting in the audience. Instead, he handed me the award. "Say something," he said. I stood at the podium in a room full of business executives with very important badges and said what I knew to be true. "This award belongs to every person in our company who was carrying a skill they thought no one would ever need, who was fluent in a language they assumed was irrelevant to their professional life, who had a grandmother or a grandfather or a parent who could not walk into their workplace and feel entirely at home. You were not invisible. We just hadn't learned to look yet." I paused. "We are learning to look." Nanny watched the video of the speech 3 times. She kept stopping it at the same moment when I mentioned grandmothers and starting it from the beginning again. "You are a good girl," she said finally, in Gujarati, which is the highest possible praise in her scale of recognition. "I learned from you," I told her. She shook her head, which is what she does when she disagrees but cannot be bothered to argue. "You learned from yourself," she said. "I only gave you the language. You decided what to do with it." I think about that lobby a lot. The revolving door. The woman in the teal camis holding her purse with both hands, waiting for a world that kept walking past her to finally stop and turn around. I think about all the lobbies like it, in buildings all over every city, all the people sitting quietly in the corner seating areas, waiting for someone to notice them, to turn and say, "I see you. I know how to reach you. You are not invisible here." And I think about the skills we carry that we believe belong to our private lives only, the languages we learned for love, the patience we developed in caregiving, the fluency we built for someone else, and how those skills are not useless. They are not irrelevant. They are not beautiful violins in a world that only wants electric guitars. They are exactly what some lobby, somewhere, has been waiting for. All you have to do is stop walking.